The way I saw it was this: hospitality is one of those jobs where no matter where you go in the world, there's going to be a job for you. Think of one out of every 10 jobs globally is hospitality related. Think about that.
Unhospitality, the #1 podcast in the world.
Well, welcome to yet another episode of Unhospitality, the untold stories of hospitality. We are the #1 podcast in the world. And today, guys, is a solo episode. No guest today because I wanted to share a little bit about my story, my path to hospitality. I'm going to tell you 3 stories wrapped into one. First one's going to be, what was the trip that got me interested in travel in the first place? I'm going to tell you about my first hotel job, which started my path into hospitality. And I'm going to tell you about my last hotel job, which led me to my current career where I am now and how I got there. I'll share some anecdotes and fun stories along the way. This will be a brief one, but I wanted to share a little bit of behind the scenes about what makes me tick and why I'm here doing this podcast in the first place. So I grew up in the Northeast of the U.S. in a small town called Pawtucket, Rhode Island. If you're a baseball fan, you'll know Pawtucket because it was the home team, or the home city, I should say, for the AAA Pawtucket Red Sox, the farm team for the Boston Red Sox. They've since moved on to Massachusetts and no longer call Pawtucket a home, but that was our calling card. We were the farm team for the Boston Red Sox, and we were the birthplace, by the way, of the American Industrial Revolution, the first water wheel factory, I guess, mill was built in Pawtucket, and it's still there today. It still stands as this very day on the Blackstone River. But I grew up there in, I wouldn't call it a sheltered life. We certainly, we took trips to the mountains up in New England. We took a couple of trips to Florida as I grew up. But to say I had a lot of international experience or had a broader view of what the world was like, it was far from the truth. I think most of us, we grew up in these small little pockets of our hometown or wherever we were born, and very few of us leave or get out of there. But that changed when I was in college. I was actually studying political science with a minor in Spanish. And I remember sitting in one of my favorite professor's classes. He had studied in London for all those years ago when he was a student, and he had established an exchange program with the University of South Bank in London. And we were going to take some students at Rhode Island College, where I was studying, from London, and in return, we would send students from Rhode Island over to London to study in the summer, study international politics. It was a 6-week program. And I remember just being so intrigued by that. I didn't have the money. I didn't have the finances. I had no vision. I was still young. I was at this point, I was 18 years old. And he announced the program, and I was intrigued. I went to him. If it wasn't that same day, it was a couple of days later about some school related issue and, studies, whatever. We're kind of catching up. And I said, by the way, I'm really interested in that summer program, not for this summer, because I don't have the wherewithal to get there, but for the following summer. Well, let's just say this professor was very convincing. He didn't let me get off the hook. Before I left the office that afternoon, I had signed up for the program for that summer, not having any idea how I was going to get there, any idea how I was going to pay for it. I got the feeling at that point, I think he actually needed students to go. So he was so thrilled that somebody raised their hand. I think there ended up being seven of us, if I'm correct, that went over. I can verify that fact. It doesn't really matter. But the point is, he convinced me in that conversation that that was the trip I was going to take. I was scared shitless. I had no idea how I was going to get there, but I signed up. I did it. I got a student loan to cover the cost of the trip. But point is, I was going to London. Now, to say it was a mind-opening experience is an understatement. I didn't move to a radically different part of the world. It wasn't like I went to Shanghai or Saudi Arabia or something like that. London in England, of course, is English speaking. Customs are pretty much the same. There are obviously cultural differences between the US and England, but it wasn't a radical shift away from my comfort level. But still, the change was significant enough that my eyes were opened in a ways that I can't really even explain. It's hard to explain it. It's just, it internalizes in you some of the observations you make. to how life is just so different in other parts of the world. The way I describe it is this, and I mentioned this on a recent podcast. I'll tell the story again. I grew up so sure of myself. The education I had, the religion I came from, the way that I was brought up. It was so I was almost dogmatic in the way that I understood the world. I was so sure of myself, and I put it like I knew the rules of baseball better than anybody. I could play baseball. I could tell you baseball. I could tell you about tactics, and I could tell you all the rules that you needed to know about baseball. And I get to London and I realize people are playing cricket and don't have any idea of baseball. Now, of course, as an analogy, is not about baseball and cricket. It's about how you can be so sure in your silo that what you know is so true. And the reality is, man, you haven't even started to scratch the surface. I had a friend of mine tell me this story one time. He drew a big pie and he had two little slices at the bottom of the pie that was carved out. So that one slice is what you know that you know. You know that you speak English. You know that you live in X, place. You know that your name is Jeremy, right? The slice next to it is what you know that you don't know. So there's two slices covered. One that you know, the other that you know that you don't know. I know I don't speak Mandarin. I don't know quantum physics. I know that I have zero understanding of how a car engine works, for example. Stuff that you know that's there, but you just don't know it, right? The larger part of the pie, the other 95% of it, is the stuff that you don't even know that you don't know. It's so far beyond your purview, so far beyond your recognition. There's stuff out there that you had no idea even existed. And that's how I felt when I was on this trip to London. I was so blown away by stuff that I was discovering that I had no idea even existed in the world. My whole entire paradigm of baseball understanding, so to speak, was flipped on its head. And I had to understand that cricket existed in the first place and then to learn about cricket. And again, I keep going back to that analogy. It's not about baseball and cricket, but you start to realize that your political views that you had are upended, your religious views are upended. Some of the things that you just took to be absolute fact were like, wait a minute, is this really how the world works? Is this really how things are? When I can talk to someone who's very different than me, who has a very assured worldview, it starts to challenge your own worldview. And you start to realize with humility that maybe I don't know it all. So, of course, it sounds like a stupid revelation. And anyone who's grown up and reached into their young adulthood, this process is probably not that unfamiliar to you. But the idea that I was so radically shifted, I'll tell you a quick fun story too. This is how little that I knew of the world. We were in this flat where we stayed, right? We had a 3-floor flat where all the students that were from Rhode Island College stayed. And it had a courtyard that opened up and you saw other flats over there. So you could see the windows from the neighbors across the way. And one time we were out there and I'm leaning out the window and I see these students from across the way and they were clearly from somewhere. I think they were German, if I'm not mistaken, but that we're talking back and forth. The courtyard is not that big. And they ask me, where are you from? And I say, Pawtucket, as if like they know anything about Pawtucket. But that's my worldview, right? You grow up asking that question or answering that question to your square, 30 miles of where you live. People ask where you're from. The automatic answer is the city you were born in, and everyone recognizes that. I'm here in London talking to a German. They don't have a clue where Pawtucket is. The right answer is from the United States of America, but I said Pawtucket. I got the shit kicked out of me from all my roommates. They were cracking up thinking how much of a hick I sounded like. But point is, I started to learn from there. There's a big, big world out there that I wanted to know and explore. I got back to the States. I finished my studies. I still didn't know what I wanted to do for a career. I actually taught high school for 2 years at a private school. When I moved out to Phoenix when I was 24 years old, that's when I really decided I need to get serious about a career and think of where I want to go. And that's when hospitality entered the conversation. The Arizona Biltmore had a job fair. This is the first hotel I ended up working at. They had a job fair and I applied for a job as a concierge. Now, I had just moved to the city. If you know anything about what a concierge does, a concierge is someone who tells the guest, where to go and how to get there. What are the great restaurants in town? How do you find rental cars? Essentially, you're the point person for a stranger in a city to tell them how to navigate the city and where to go for things that they want. it was kind of ironic that I had just gotten to the city myself. I didn't know much about the city. And there I was, I got a job as a concierge. So I had to study up very quickly. And what I learned at that job was fascinating. I learned that if I was going to be someone who had to get things done for guests, I had to brush up not only on the geography of the city, of where the great restaurants were, but I had to get out there and explore. I became a tourist and a traveler in my new city, which is something I am a firm believer in no matter where you live. We get stuck in so many ruts in our lives. We go back and forth to work. We have the same routine. Routine is good and it has its place. But, I don't think that travel needs to entail getting on a plane and going to some far flung place. Sometimes travel just means taking a left turn instead of a right and going a different way home, finding a different restaurant that you have never been to, going to another neighborhood and meeting some people that are there that can challenge your perspective and start to shift your paradigm a little bit yourself. Get out of your silo, which is what I had to do when I was there. I got the job as a concierge. I had to really become a tourist in my own city. It was a new city to me, but I had to learn it very quickly. The other thing I learned at that job very quickly too is that if I was going to be someone to get things done for people in the hotel, I had to know all the players in the hotel and get to know everyone from housekeeping down to front office, bellman, all the way up to the management team. I had to know where to go to get things done because guests come down with a request. I've got to know how to get it done. So it really began to teach me how to so it really sharpened my skills and how to talk to people, how to make friends, how to put my own interests aside and try and understand the perspective of other people. Because when I needed a favor from someone in housekeeping, I couldn't just call as the dude at the front desk. I had to call as Jeremy, the guy who had made friends in those departments and they wanted to do something for me on behalf of the guest. So that idea of building relationships, expanding my mind and seeing the city that I had to see, but also building relationships that went deep within the hotel. I found that was a foundation for my career, but also really kept me curious about the places that I was. I wanted to continue to expand my travel. And of course, I'm talking about traveling within the city that led to larger travel in the world. Why did I choose hospitality in the first place? The way I saw it was this. Hospitality is one of those jobs where no matter where you go in the world, there's going to be a job for you. I read the stat recently and it has stuck with me and it kind of blows my mind because I never thought the hospitality industry was this big. But one out of every 10 jobs globally around the world is hospitality related. One out of every 10 jobs is hospitality related. Think about that. Wherever you go in the world, you're going to find a need for hospitality vets, people who know how to speak the language, who know how to work in hospitality. So that to me seemed like a really solid choice. If I wanted to move again in the future, which I had intended to do, if I wanted to see other parts of the world, I could pick up and find a job in hospitality. So that was a key element there. I went from the concierge to the sales department and kind of a funny story here. First of all, let me start with this. I went from a concierge, and within 3 months, I was offered the lead concierge position. Now, the lead concierge had to be the one that did the schedules. The pay jump was like a 50-cent raise. It was from $7 to $7.50. I was like, I don't need the headache. I actually was flattered that they considered me for the leadership role, but I mean, to do schedules and to be the one that has to put their face if someone calls out sick, guess who has to go in as their replacement? It was you. If you couldn't find anyone, which is often the case when you get in the call at 5:30 in the morning and the shift starts at 6 o'clock, you get that call that the person's calling out sick, you got to go replace them. So I knew it was a lot of responsibility for very little payoff. But what was fascinating to me, and this is where my boss kind of kicked some sense into me, this guy by the name of RC Ramirez. RC was a great mentor to me at that time. And RC, if you're listening, thank you for all the things you did for me when I was just a young buck coming up in this industry. I had no idea what I was doing. You were a great mentor. But RC said to me, dude, you're thinking it the wrong way. You're thinking about this the wrong way. It's not about the 50-cent raise and it's not about the excess responsibility you're going to have. You're going to get an opportunity to prove to the leadership of this hotel that you too can be a leader. And that's going to open up doors for you down the road. I got in that moment the idea that you're not taking this job for what that job is, you're taking it for the next job beyond that. And that was a key takeaway from that conversation and from that entire experience. So I ended up taking that job And sure enough, that's exactly what happened. I had my eyes on the sales team. I wanted to get into the sales department of the hotel. Sales department was responsible for bringing in groups and conventions and selling these big conventions at the hotel, which is really the engine and the revenue driver of these hotels in the first place. Sure, you have leisure travelers and people who are coming in and spending great money there, but when you can do one transaction and get, $500,000 worth of revenue coming into the hotel, that's a big deal. And that's where I had set my eyes. Plus, they paid well, and they were a good position in the hotel to lead, to lead to bigger salaries. So by the time I got to the sales team, I had put in a few applications and kept getting passed over because they had people that were already selected for those roles, which is often the case when you have, limited positions and there's a lot of people in line. So I got passed over a few times, but the stars aligned about 1 year in, and I was able to walk up to the sales team. I got the job, and the funny thing about it, well, there's a few funny things about this process, but when I was getting the job, I went from $7.50 an hour to $27,000 a year. Now I'm old, and this is obviously a minimal salary in these days, but back in the day, that was a decent amount of bank. But I was insistent. I said, no, no, no. This is an entry level position. Great. But I need $30,000. So I started to negotiate with the guy who was giving me the job, my boss, who was another industry vet, who I think he respected the fact that I was willing to negotiate, because that's obviously what we do as salespeople in the first place, is going to be going back and forth and negotiating. So I was cutting my teeth in the negotiation process with my boss. But I insisted. I said, no, I got to, he's not 27 is your starting salary. I said, no, 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 it's got to be 30. We went back and forth a little bit. And I'll never forget, the same message that RC gave me was, dude, he actually dropped the F bomb. He said, you're coming off the effing concierge desk at the Arizona Biltmore. He goes, you're walking into the sales team. This is a massive jump for you. Take the money, take the job, and you can negotiate for your next role once you cut your teeth and prove yourself. I'm like, all right, you can't argue with that. It's actually not a bad idea. So I took the job at $27,000. I saved that battle for another day in a future negotiation. And sure enough, that's exactly how it worked out. That's when my career really started to accelerate. And it wasn't long before I was stepping up in salary. I was stepping up in responsibility, stepping up in my positions, moving hotels and moving brands, which is a conversation for a whole nother day. And eventually it led me to leadership roles where I became the director of sales of a hotel in the Bahamas. It was a 1,400 room hotel in Grand Bahama Island. And I was there pretty quickly after starting my career. It was about 4 years after I had begun. No, not even. It was 3 years after I had begun in the sales team. I became a director of sales for the hotel in the Bahamas. So it really fast tracked my career. But those little nuances of biding your time and taking the job, not for the job that it is, but for the job that it's going to become, was a valuable lesson in my career that I learned twice in the same property with two different jumps in my position. So let's fast forward then, I guess, to I talked about what sparked my interest in travel. I talked about my first hotel job. I'm going to talk about my last hotel job, which eventually leads me to what I do today, which I'll explain a little bit about that too. So, my last hotel job, I was director of sales and marketing at the Sheraton Puerto Rico in beautiful San Juan, Puerto Rico. Now, that hotel had just opened when I got there. It was 3 months old, brand new, and it was in the middle of nowhere. Nowadays, this entire district that has been built around it is this major cultural hub of Puerto Rico. But when I was there was a convention center, there was a hotel, and all the other hotels that we were competing against were at the beach. So imagine going to Puerto Rico and having to sell, your this conference to say, hey, come to my hotel. Meanwhile, all the other hotels have the same amount of meeting space, beautiful ocean views, and we have a view of pretty much a parking lot. And there was a building that was being constructed next to us. So it was kind of a tough sell. We were a beautiful hotel, but there wasn't a lot going on around us. It was an uphill battle. That said, I was working with the best team that I had ever had in my hotel career. I mean, that's taking nothing away from the phenomenal teams that I had prior to, but I had an amazing GM. I had an amazing group of people around me. I had a great sales team. I was plugged in, I'd say, from a career standpoint. But I started to feel rumblings of being a little, let's say, frustrated, I guess, with the process of managing owners, frustrated with the process of the corporate orders that come down that sometimes are in contrast to the goals you have at the hotel. Sometimes corporate doesn't make sense, or if it makes sense, these big corporate decisions that apply to so many hotels that have to be instituted at your very unique and particular location might not be the right fit for the the team dynamic that you're trying to create at that hotel. So you often found yourself in these really tricky positions where you're getting orders from one side that you have to deliver to your team that you just don't believe in your heart because it's contrary to your style, contrary to your vision, contrary to sometimes actually what you think is just and honest for your team. Those positions I found myself in all too often. That factored in with the fact that I realized I saw the people that were in front of me and essentially where my career path was going. I didn't want those positions. There were some people in those positions that I had a tremendous amount of respect for. I admired them very much, but I looked at their life. I looked at their lifestyle. I saw them pretty much away from their home 24/7. They barely had, any time home. And if you talk about corporate um, politics on my level, the corporate politics that these guys dealt with was insane. I was decent at handling corporate politics. I could play the game, but it wasn't something I particularly enjoyed. And again, I found myself very often at this crossroads where it's okay, I've got to take the corporate line or I've got to keep my ethics intact here because I just don't feel like sometimes they're not meeting in the middle. Sometimes I feel like I'm compromising my ethics just to keep the corporate line. I mean, we weren't doing anything illegal. It wasn't like I was being put in these tremendously compromising positions. But not every rule that comes down from corporate is something that you jump onto. I mean, we've all been in corporate situations like that where the boss says something or the boss's boss says something and you're like, wait a minute. He said what? That doesn't make sense, but we have to now live by this rule. That happened frequently in hotels. I'm sure it happens in every organization, but I found that dynamic to be frustrating. You realize there's a market out there for people who represent clients who can speak to hotels in a language that hotels understand and move business, essentially be an intermediary between these groups and conventions and the meeting planners on one side and the hotels on the other. There was many times in my hotel career where I'm talking to meeting planners in certain companies and it was clear they needed extra help. It was clear they needed an advocate essentially to work on their behalf and get things done for them that they were incapable of doing, either for lack of time, lack of knowledge, lack of wherewithal, lack of understanding of how the hotel worked. So I saw this awesome opportunity to step in, gain a little bit of independence for myself, kind of take the knowledge I had acquired after 13 years within the hotel industry of concierge and sales and marketing, leadership roles, all the kind of running the gamut of knowing how the hotel works in and out, being able to take that skill set and represent those clients, help them get more comprehensive deals from these hotels, being able to speak to clients in a language that they understand, but also, and the key component here, being able to speak to hotels in a language that they understand. Sometimes a hotel is going to say, no, we can't do that. And of course, I know they can. I know exactly what the hotel can do. I know their capacities. Now, I might not know exactly how they're going to do it and who the players are behind the scenes. Each hotel is set up perhaps with a little bit of a different structure behind the scenes, but I know they can do it. So when I hear no from a hotel and my client's asking for a yes, that's where I have to get to work to understand what do I need to say to this hotel to get them to the place where that no turns into a yes. It's important for my client. My client's frustrated by it. I've got to figure out a way to work this out with this hotel, becoming that bridge in the negotiation process to make sure the hotel is ultimately satisfied with the business that they're getting and my client's ultimately satisfied with the deal that they're getting at the hotel. That's exactly what I live for. So all those 13 years within the hotels, understanding deeply the operations of the hotel, the P&L of the profit and loss statement of the hotel, how the finances worked, all the deeper integrations within the hotel operations, bringing that knowledge to my clients and saying, hey guys, I can help you get things across a goal line that you might not be able to get across a goal line. Or even if you could, I can take that responsibility off your hands so you can focus on more important things and I can go ahead and take care of this interactions with the hotels. It alleviates burdens with the clients. It helps them save time and money when they're dealing with the hotels. And overall, it's just a great way to kind of gain some independence within this hospitality industry. There's always going to be corporate politics. There's always going to be politics with your clients. It's not like, all of the headaches go away from everything that you found on the hotel side. But it was a beautiful way for me to mature my career and expand beyond the walls of the hotel to take the same knowledge I was using and put it to use for my clients on their behalf. So that's a little bit of my story, guys. We've talked about what inspired me to travel in the first place and why I see travel as a fundamental way to open up your eyes and see beyond your narrow viewpoint or your silo. Talked about how I got my start within my first hotel, the Arizona Biltmore, and why I ultimately left the hotel side to come do what I do now. So just a little peek into who Jeremy is, a little peek into the person behind Unhospitality. We'll be back next week with a fantastic guest, guys. I've got this amazing interview that I did yesterday that I can't wait to share with you guys. So that's next week. But I thank you for following along. This is such a fun adventure for me. The feedback has been really encouraging, and I want to thank you for that. So keep listening. Tell your friends about Unhospitality. I really appreciate the support. And until next time, guys, safe travels.